Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into what is undoubtedly one of the darkest, most consequential chapters in all of human history. We're going to examine, very clinically and methodically, exactly how a failed artist managed to capitalize on a shattered nation and legally dismantle a modern democracy from the inside out. We're going to break down the whole shebang, the psychological roots, the economic catalysts, and the precise political maneuvers that actually allowed Adolf Hitler to seize absolute power. Okay, let's dive right into this. To really wrap our heads around the sheer terror of this regime, we actually need to start at the very end. Picture this. It's 1945, and an 11-year-old German boy named Helmuth overhears his parents talking in these hushed, absolutely terrified tones. His father, who was a supporter of the regime, told his wife that it was time to end the whole family. He literally said, "Now the Allies will do to us what we did to the Jews." The very next day, right after a family picnic in the woods, Helmut's father went into his office and shot himself. Young Helmut was so traumatized by this that for the next 9 years, he refused to eat food at home, completely terrified that his own mother would poison him. This story perfectly encapsulates the legacy of the Nazi regime, an era built on unimaginable atrocities that ended in absolute dread and destruction. And not just for the millions of innocent victims, but ultimately for the nation that allowed it to happen in the first place.
Section 1. The mind of a dictator, the psychological roots of a tyrant.
To make sense of the political rise, we first have to understand the psychological foundation of the man himself. And the stark contrast between his early life and his terrifying future is just jarring. As a young boy, he sang in a church choir. He actually aspired to be a priest, or later on an artist. But his day-to-day reality was incredibly harsh. He was deeply traumatized by the death of his younger brother, Edmund, from measles, and even worse, he endured severe, daily physical abuse from a highly tyrannical father. According to psychological analyses, by the time he was 11 years old, he refused to give his father the satisfaction of crying. He famously endured 32 lashes with a whip in total silence. This absolute helplessness as a child really laid the groundwork for a profound, deep-seated rage. Psychologists looking at his profile often use a very specific term: a dysdaimonic genius. It's a rare, highly confounding state where exceptional, persuasive, and creative abilities somehow combine with severe psychopathology, borderline paranoia, and sheer destructiveness. Driven by this overwhelming will to power, basically a way to overcompensate for the absolute powerlessness he felt in childhood, he learned to fiercely repress his anxiety and his rage. Eventually, he would weaponize those exact emotions, projecting them outward onto marginalized groups, and ultimately, the rest of the world. Moving to Section 2, A Nation in Ruins, the devastation of post-World War I Germany. If his damaged psyche was the spark, while post-World War I Germany was the dry tinder just waiting to catch fire. Let's look at the environment that allowed this kind of extremism to take root. He served as a soldier in World War I and even received an Iron Cross for bravery. But when Germany surrendered, he, along with a lot of radical nationalists, completely refused to accept that the German military had actually been defeated on the battlefield. Instead, they manufactured this incredibly powerful conspiracy theory, the stab in the back myth. They aggressively pushed the narrative that Germany was betrayed from within. They blamed civil leaders, Marxists, and Jewish people, branding them the November criminals. This scapegoating provided a very convenient target for a humiliated nation's anger. And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer desperation of the time. When we consider the penalties from the Treaty of Versailles, it becomes pretty obvious why the German public felt so humiliated. The peace agreement was intentionally designed to break Germany's ability to ever wage war again. Just think about these numbers for a second. They lost 13% of their territory, a staggering 75% of their iron resources, and 26% of their coal. And on top of all that, they were handed a bill for £6.6 billion in financial reparations. The newly formed democratic government, the Weimar Republic, was saddled with an absolute impossible burden right from day one. Because Germany simply couldn't pay these massive debts, France actually stepped in and occupied the Ruhr region, which was essentially Germany's industrial heartland. In a desperate move to pay the striking workers there, the German government did the worst thing possible. They just printed more money. The result was hyperinflation on a scale that's hard to even wrap your head around. The currency became practically worthless. I mean, literally a whole wheelbarrow full of cash couldn't even buy you a basic loaf of bread. This absolute economic despair is vital to our story because it completely primed the German population to actively look for radical, strongman solutions. Section 3. Rebuilding the Nazi Machine. The strategy of the lean years. Following all this economic chaos,
The extremist Nazi Party actually tried to seize power by force, and they failed miserably. This leads us to a crucial period historians call the lean years, running from roughly 1924 to 1928. This is where the party completely rebuilt itself from the ground up. Back in 1923, he had attempted a violent overthrow of the government in Bavaria, an event known as the Beer Hall Putsch. It was an absolute disaster. He was arrested, but interestingly, a sympathetic judge only gave him 9 months in prison. During that brief sentence, he wrote his manifesto, Mein Kampf. But more importantly, he realized a fundamental truth. He wasn't going to be able to take over the state by force. He had to pivot. He realized he had to use the democratic system against itself and win power through legal, legitimate elections. Now, to make the party electable, he needed absolute, unquestioned control over its core message. Enter the Bamberg Conference in 1926. Here, he ruthlessly centralized his power. See, the Nazi Party at the time was somewhat split between a socialist wing that appealed heavily to workers and a nationalist wing. He completely crushed the socialist faction, essentially labeling them communists. He sidelined rivals like Gregor Strasser and brought highly skilled propagandists like Joseph Goebbels directly into his inner circle. This ensured the party strictly followed his own nationalist, anti-Semitic vision. It was pure political survival of the fittest. With his leadership completely unquestioned, he started building a highly organized national machine. He strategically divided Germany into 35 distinct regions, with each one run by a totally loyal leader. Crucially, he also secured massive funding from major industrialists and corporations, folks like Thyssen and Krupp. Now, why would they fund him? Well, these business owners were absolutely terrified of a communist takeover and the rise of trade unions, so they saw his party as a protective shield. He also created the SS under Heinrich Himmler. This was a smaller, highly disciplined, black-uniformed elite paramilitary force designed to replace the rowdy, unruly street thugs of his earlier days. He was basically dressing up an extremist, violent movement in the clothes of a legitimate, disciplined political party. Section 4. The Economic Tipping Point. The catalyst of the Great Depression. Now, despite all this careful organizing, by 1928, the party still only held a tiny, almost insignificant fraction of the national vote. It took a global catastrophe to really push them into the mainstream. So the crucial point we have to understand is this staggering number, 6 million. That is the number of German citizens who found themselves completely, devastatingly unemployed after the 1929 Wall Street crash triggered the Great Depression. The American loans that had literally been propping up the fragile German economy vanished overnight. Industrial production plummeted by 40%. The despair in the country was absolute. And the direct political fallout of that economic collapse is wild to look at. Back in the 1928 elections, the Nazis received just 2.6% of the vote, almost nothing. But fast forward to 1932, amidst mass starvation and those 6 million unemployed workers, their support absolutely skyrocketed to an estimated 38 million votes. That made them the largest party in the Reichstag, holding roughly 38% of the seats. Economic devastation directly, quantifiably translated into extremist voting. In a time when mainstream traditional politicians seemed completely powerless to fix things, he weaponized his unparalleled public speaking skills. He offered absolute, unwavering certainty to a population that had none at all. He didn't just give speeches, he performed. He actively manipulated the desperate masses by promising full employment, a definitive end to the humiliating Treaty of Versailles, and a glorious immediate return to national strength. He knew their pain, and he told them exactly what they desperately needed to hear. Section 5. The Death of Democracy. The Legal Subversion of the Republic. Now we enter the final and honestly the most chilling phase of this explainer. The Nazis were indeed the largest party, but they still did not have a true majority. So how exactly did they achieve a total dictatorship? Well, Hitler didn't take the highest office by force. Believe it or not, it was handed to him by traditional, moderate politicians who actually thought they were outsmarting him. Fearful of a potential communist uprising, conservative politicians, wealthy industrialists, and the aging President Hindenburg struck a backroom deal. On January 30th, 1933, they legally appointed him as chancellor. They fatally miscalculated, genuinely believing they could put him in a box, manage him, and use his massive popularity to control the masses. Let's move to and see how this builds into the complete legal destruction of the Republic in just 3 remarkably swift steps. First, in February 1933, the main parliament building, the Reichstag, mysteriously caught fire. He immediately loudly blamed communist agitators, creating widespread national panic. Second, using that exact panic as leverage, he convinced the president to sign the Reichstag fire decree. This instantly suspended the basic civil rights of all German citizens. Finally, in March, he pushed through what was called the Enabling Act. This law legally bypassed Parliament entirely, granting him the sole power to pass laws on his own. In a matter of weeks, a modern democracy legally voted itself right out of existence.
Section 6, Absolute Power and Downfall. The Nightmare Realized.
With absolute, completely unchecked legal power secured, the mask completely came off. The nightmare of the totalitarian state was realized, and the speed of the takeover was just staggering. All opposing political parties banned outright. Trade unions, gone. The media, the military, the courts, and the entire economy were swiftly brought under strict, absolute control. School curriculums were entirely rewritten from the ground up. Children were literally taught racial superiority, aggressive masculinity, and blind, unquestioning loyalty to the state. Meanwhile, handicapped children were quietly removed. And internationally, this unchecked aggression and insatiable demand for more territory ultimately forced all of Europe into the catastrophic devastation of World War II. But the most horrific outcome of this unchecked power, undoubtedly driven by his deep-seated pathology and a heavily twisted, pseudo-scientific ideology of racial purity, was the Holocaust. Blaming Jewish people as internal traitors who had allegedly caused all of Germany's historical suffering, the regime quickly moved from basic discrimination to systematic, industrialized mass murder. Millions of Jewish people, along with other marginalized groups, were sent to concentration camps and systematically murdered in gas chambers. It remains one of the most profound, devastating atrocities ever committed in the entire history of human civilization. Which leaves us with this final, incredibly critical thought. The tragedy we've unpacked today wasn't simply some fluke accident of history. It was a methodical, step-by-step process. So looking back at all this evidence, we really have to ask ourselves, just how fragile are our democratic institutions when a population is pushed to the absolute brink of economic desperation, and a highly charismatic leader successfully weaponizes their anger? It is a dark, heavy historical lesson for sure, but understanding this exact sequence of events is exactly why knowing our history matters so much today. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the world around you.